Hey everyone, I'm RVRocks, and I recently finished the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And overall, I had a good time. This game's combat is something else. It blends the turn-based strategy mechanics of what the original had with a brand new original system, and frankly makes for something that is very fun to play. Each character has their own unique flow of combat, meaning that some are up close and personal, others are far off and ranged fighters, but the hit sounds and the animations make it satisfying to play no matter what your style is. You might be thinking, how did I just now finish the game? And well, the truth is, I play games extraordinarily slowly sometimes. Most of the time, this isn't really a fault of the game, but a fault of the player. I have a hard time sitting down and consuming media for long periods of time, which is why I often default to games that have no strict sense of storytelling, or a very limited one, online shooters, fighting games, games I play with my friends, or just games that are very mindless. Sit down, play for a little, be done for a while kind of games, you can always pick them back up. But I will say, what is it that all these single-player narratives have done to make me not want to play them? Well, for some games, it's an incredibly punishing experience to drop them, so once I have, I simply haven't come back. Other games, it's something outside of the game's control that makes me not want to play them. And in other cases, such as the case for Final Fantasy VII Remake, the game moves so slowly, when you get to the boring parts, you stay in the boring parts for hours. Final Fantasy VII Remake, by all accounts, is a great game, but it has so many small issues in its foundation that lead the game to be constantly bogged down by what are ultimately, as I said, small issues. Say what you want about how the game deviates from the original, whether or not you think that's a good thing. For the most part, what's there is solid, but what is bad plagues the entire experience. But what kind of man would I be if I just sat and complained about how I didn't like something without giving any possible solutions? I should preface this with the fact that there will be light spoilers, such as character names and locations, but if you know the original Final Fantasy VII, you'll be fine, and if you don't want to watch this in the name of spoilers, that's also fine. Also, I never played the original Final Fantasy VII, so I know nothing of the context of the original game, which is fine, because apparently the remake deviates hilariously. So, throughout the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you have 4 main party members you switch between. Anyone who's ever played a video game will probably recognize Cloud, Barret, Tifa, and Aerith. But characters who, from my understanding, had very little presence in the original game, Biggs, Jessie, Wedge, and Leslie, all get a very large presence in this game. However, this is where the disconnect between the original and the remake rears its ugly heads. In the cutscenes, these 4 all have a large presence, and the game tries to make you really care about them. But when you get to the gameplay, they are nowhere to be seen. A lot of RPGs do this with characters, where it's like, let's go team, and then you get into battle and the other characters aren't anywhere to be seen. Sure, Leslie has an excuse for this, he tells you he's not very fond of battling, fine, I get it. But the other 3 are treated as main members of the team, and are around for most of the story in the game. I'm a big proponent of gameplay conveying story as much as cutscenes, because what fun is it for these 2 entities to exist in completely alternate instances? Now, let me sidetrack a bit. Back to this guy. So, you meet him at the end of the game. He's known as Red 13, a nice cat who can talk. The remake doesn't go into his backstory at all, so you basically now know as much as I do. Red 13 is what the game calls a guest character. He's not part of your party, he's not a playable character, he just attacks every now and then during fights, like a summon but less useful. Apparently, he was a character in the original game, like a full-on playable character, but because this game conveys a small portion of the original, he isn't significant enough to be a playable character, which is fine. But this leads me to another issue. Why is the guest character a concept we get introduced to in the last 5th of the game? Furthermore, why is the guest character so limited? If you ask me, the perfect way to fix both of these issues is to make these 4 characters that I listed earlier into the guest character, and give the player some way to control the guest character. Obviously, ideally, if you're going to try to make these guys into significant parts of the story, you can make them into playable characters so you gain something when they're around, but that's a lot of development work, so why not have a system like the summons, who, for those unaware, basically are extra party members for a limited amount of time, who can do special attacks based on how much you filled up these bars known as ATB. You fill them up by attacking, it's not that complex. But for these guys, have them be like permanent summons, with less utility. Make it so they can't take damage, so they won't be eating up your healing items, and give them small, not very useful normal attacks. But give each of these characters a use. Maybe have it cost like 2 bars of ATB. Give each of the guests like 1 special attack that would be useful. Maybe Wedge, the comedic relief, taunts them and makes the enemies focus on him. Jessie throws bombs, why doesn't she throw out like a stun bomb as her assist? Maybe have Biggs, the cool guy, unload a clip into an enemy. Red 13 could do the cool beam move he does during spoilers. Leslie doesn't really fight, nor show any combat ability like the others, but you could probably give him something too. Making it cost ATB could also mean you could have all 3 of these guys by your side at once. So while each of them has a strong ability, you would never really be able to pull out all the strong abilities. Hell, if you're worried about balancing, then give them a cooldown. It makes too much sense. Of course, these guys aren't around the whole game, hence why they are not designated the role of playable character, but if they're going to try and make me care about these characters throughout the narrative, they need to have some kind of gameplay presence beyond cutscenes and dialogue. When I have Cloud and Barret take down a bunch of dudes, there's of course the fun of seeing the two characters' dialogue play off each other, but you also get that back of the brain feeling of, oh okay, so this attack worked really well in tandem with this attack, they are working together as one unit. So, if you want to give these 5 a bigger presence in the player's mind, they should also have some form of that. Like early on in the story, Wedge fights as part of your team, and then he injures himself by hurting his ass, and is taken out of commission. In this situation, the player is left to sit and be like, oh man, I kinda liked him, he was funny. But if he was a guest character, like how I had mentioned, you would be thinking, oh man, I like the funny guy. Oh shit, I won't be able to use his useful ability. That will make the next combat encounter a bit more challenging, and give you more attachment to the character on more than a surface level. Overall, while I do maintain that the story of this game is a pretty good one, this mechanic would have elevated it to the next level for me. This one is self-explanatory.
You did it!
Yeah.
Hand.
Huh?
Give it to me!
Go home and stay there.
You know I can't do that.
What'll it be for you today?
The mayor.
Mayo? Sorry, we don't have any here.
This isn't to say all of these examples are bad, but holy hell, Cloud never sounds interested in his surroundings.
So, Cloud, you were a soldier first class, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a voice actor, so any attempt I make to quote-unquote fix these just kinda boils down to do it better. Yeah, I know, not very helpful. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a mostly linear game, which is to say, the first 2 levels are action upon action, running around, blowing up shit, killing robots, the whole 9 yards. Then the game grinds to an absolute halt in Chapter 3, and tries to be an open world game too, and give you mediocre side quests. Rarely are these side quests interesting, and even more rarely are these side quests worth doing for their rewards. My solution? Strike them entirely. There has to be more interesting and fluid ways to let you experience the highlights and choices these side quests give you. There are 3 chapters in this game that completely break flow and say, well, now you should do all the side things and come actually play the game later. And they take way too long. They completely destroy any sense of urgency you may have had. Because it's so important that you do squats while Aerith gets makeup on. It's so important to go find cats instead of rendezvousing with the team. And it's so important that you go destroy boxes instead of going to actually fix the very big problem that was caused a chapter earlier. The pacing issue doesn't just lie there either. The pacing applies directly to gameplay as well. Most of the time in games, if you are forced to walk around a lot doing nothing, they'll give you some form of movement that makes the player play the game without playing the game. These can range from Assassin's Creed's fun free-running sprinting, to Shadow of War's boost after vaulting objects, to being able to completely fuck movement by sliding in certain games. Others handle this by giving your character a vehicle of some kind. Final Fantasy VII Remake finds a way to actively impede your movement at every step of the way. You see one of these arrows on the ground? Fucking buckle up, you're gonna be here for the next hour. You know what, if they want to have a few of these areas, fine. Like that time in the ducks, it was slow, frustrating to control, but I get it, it's supposed to be up close and personal, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It could have been just as easily a cutscene, but fine, I get it. The thing is, this area stood out especially to me, because this is like the 300th time they make you walk through a slow-ass area for way too long. The game is riddled with these moments where you're forced to move slowly. Like, were we as gamers not vocal enough about how we hated Assassin's Creed following missions? Like, this isn't exactly the same, but the comparisons write themselves. Forced to move way too slowly, the segment being playable doesn't do anything for the player, and it just frustrates me. Feel free in the comments to hit me with that impatient American doesn't understand Japanese art, and fine, I get it. But I think a big weakness of mine when it comes to games is patience, hence why I don't really like turn-based games. But when 50% of your game is wham, boom, action, explosion, badass, and then the other half is just slowly meandering to the next combat encounter, it creates a heavy disconnect between the player and the game. Like somewhere in the first hour of the game, Cloud does the triple flipperoo onto this platform, but then repeatedly throughout the game, you're forced to meander through slow segments to get around platforms that he's shown to be easily able to jump. But then he can't go faster than this? Like, come on! My solution, make moments like these faster, or a cutscene. At a certain point, it just feels like you're purposefully wasting the player's time. So, those are my issues with Final Fantasy VII Remake, although at this point it should really be named Final Fantasy VII Redo. I think the game exceeds where it really counts, but holy shit, the stuff that's bad is really bad. Does it make an unplayable experience? No. Does it make me not want to play it for long periods of time and significantly reduces my enjoyment of the experience as a whole? Well, yeah. Final Fantasy VII is one of the most beloved and influential games of all time. And now, my first taste of it is going to be forever tainted by the waste potential of several aspects of the game. However, one thing's for sure. When it comes time for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 or Episode 2 or whatever it ends up being, I will be there on day 1. Even if I finish it on day 90. And with that, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here today, make sure to like, subscribe, do all that junk. I'm a smaller channel, so if you do end up doing it, it holds much more staying power than it would do on one of the big boys, so please give me your 2 cents. I try to respond to every comment that says something of value, so give me the time of day. Anyways, with all that being said, I've been RVRocks, and thank you so much for watching. See ya!